Gods, he would have her stretch her arms open wide for him, so he could look at her teats, engulf them in his mouth, suck them to engorgement, stretch her legs open, inspect her cunt, have her widen her eyes while he pleasured her, hump her to satisfaction. He looked back to the Lord, who was clearly well on the path to death. Yet, the man did believe in the curse of the blade, as did he, himself. Destroy it, break it into pieces and throw it into a lake. Do no, get it reforged, or the misfortune will be bound to the new piece. Listen, he bellowed, as the Lord bent double. But Utad was in too much of a coughing fit to either speak or to listen. Pain had caused his pallid complexion to be sheened in perspiration. Leave him, Edith told Heston, who backed away, but only an inch. My money? He prompted. Take it, snapped Finan, who hoiked it out of Utad's pocket, his eyes returning quickly to his lord. Heston did not linger, and he soon pushed open the door of the Swan. Keep it closed, Cithric ordered, when the door swung open again, and Finan crossed the straw-lined floor, taking up a chair and wedging it under the latch. Get him upstairs, Edith called, as Utad swooned, but then he waved off Osfith and Cithric, trying to stand by himself. She turned to Finan who, even now, after all the time that had elapsed, still made her catch her breath. He softened his features, which confessed his fears. He is getting worse, Finan declared, pacing on the spot, which is what he did when he was really scared. Really? Edith made to put an arm on his, but then thought better of it. We need to get to this place, in Wales, Edith told them. Ship would be favorite, a covered ship. Can you get one? Finan stopped pacing, and then looked at her. Yes, there are many we can steal. He had his eye on a Norse one, sitting in the harbor, seemingly abandoned. She caught his eye, and Finan, caught off guard, softened to her. I will be with you. He will need me, Edith murmured, as Cithric called for her from the stairs. You know now where we need to be. 88,888,888. The palace was not so much big as weatherproofed. On the cliff overlooking the confluence of the Irish Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, with a wharf protected by a large harbour wall, Osrith looked approvingly at King Hywel's palace, Tydui, the house of Saint David, where the relics of Wales's most beloved holy man were reputed to lie, in the foundations of the cathedral beyond the river, which separated it from the palace, and both rose into view as the salt-caked mariners climbed the rock-hewn steps. Osrith's legs failed near the top, and it had taken Angus and Eswi caught her arms and helped her to the cliff top. She inhaled the sea air fresher here, as she stumbled behind Phelim and Pylig, who had stopped dead. For, instead of a welcome that they had enjoyed on Bardsea Island, Osrith saw that they were surrounded. Soldiers of Deheubarth, dressed in the red of the drake-cock, the red dragon, ancient symbol of the Cymric, stood in a tight arc around them, spears in their hands. There was nowhere to go, except back down the cliff steps. And Osrith looked through dry hair strands that she had not even had the strength to pull off her face, as half a dozen Cymric closed the gap. They were surrounded, and the men were closing in around them. Lydoc. A call came from in front of them, and Osrith saw Pylig had stepped in front of Angus, and was calling above the heads of the men. Lydoc. It is me, Pylig. I have come with what you want. And from his waistcoat he pulled a knife, a little shorter than tagged seeks, which Osrith fingered. Angus pulled her hand away. Hywel, Pylig called again, glancing back to Osrith. I have brought it for you, what you commissioned me for. He thrust the blade into the air. Osrith was expecting a flash of lightning from the grey cumulonimbus clouds piling up on the horizon, and laughed a quick ha. When nothing happened. Come on, Lord King, Pylig called, his voice low, almost threatening. I have come a long way, I have guests for you who have travelled longer. But still the red wall did not move, and Osrith felt her legs begin to shake, the intemperate weather getting to her legs. She wanted to move, but a dozen spear points were within 6 inches of her face. And then they retreated. Osrith planted her feet firmly onto the ground, as willing herself to stand strong against the men, who she felt were about to lunge at them, forcing them towards the steps in the cliff, or over it, and felt the ogham lines on Buade's hilt. She had scratched them onto it herself, just the first 5 letters of the alphabet. But they always made her feel steadied, the strength of her former self, at the prime of her life, winning combat after combat in battle, having the heart and the stomach for the stench and the mud and the blood. Though the Walees were her kin, her Strathclydian kin, Osrith would have no hesitation in attacking them back if they threatened her or her men. And she stepped forward, the muscle memory of so many battles being felt in her arms, in her legs. Osrith's eyes scanned the foe, watching for their weakness, for a boy not quite ready, for an ailment badly concealed. She would fight them, and she would win. She turned, Buat swiping past Eswi's ear, taking a few strands of his long black hair with the stroke. He grasped her wrist and she resheathed Buat. "There is no need," he said to her, in Gaelish. "This is *S. Welcome to us all. Look." And he pointed to a fissure in the circle of Cymric, where stood a tall, robust man, dressed in the same scarlet as his men, a circlet across his brow. Hywel the Good, he was known as, for his justice to the poorest people of his lands, an epithet known far from his lands. And his lands were virtually impenetrable by road, though these were few, due to the mountains. Mountains which could not be held by the foreigners, the Saxons. All attempts had resulted in bloody guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks, as the Romans had found, though the Latins had merely wanted Wales for its gold and copper and other natural resources, to plunder it, rather than live in it. But the Saxons, and the Angles too, had both coveted Wales, and in Ethelred's last attempt, he had made many inroads into the northern kingdom of Gwynedd, which was also coveted by Hywel. And this was made easier by the alliance in perpetuity, to not only defend one another's lands, but to fight for one another, when either called. "Guests," Hywel said, and the circle of his men widened. "Grow so wide Hugh Bath, my home is your home, for the duration of your time with us." And to Osrith's astonishment, Hywel took her hand, and lowered his lips to it, softly. "My lady," he said, stepping back, before holding out an arm which pointed in the direction of his fortress at Tydui. "For this," Hywel continued, waving at his army, "I apologize." He looked to Eswi, Engus and Felim, and gestured to his fortress. "I have, currently, Norse camped at my port of Abergwaun. To the north, they raid, they rob and kill my people. So we are prepared." And Hywel led them on, into his fortress at Tydui. What Osrith noticed first, as well as the well-banked fire, for which he was deeply grateful, was that Hywel did not speak the Cymric of the South Walleen, not that of Heth, Peleg's wife, or of the women they had met when Angus had pulled ashore, seeking food, on their way to Gloucester. His voice sounded the Cymric words like Angus did, like, even, the Britons far east in Alba, at Dunnottar. Food was late, and while it was possible they were expected, Osrith considered that their number was only 5, where there were 70 Walees in the hall, tables full of food, jugs full of ale. "My guests, you are welcome." Hywel gestured, to benches to his left, and Eswi took Osrith's arm and guided her over, noticing her paleness in the sheep-fat candlelight. "Please sit. Eat with us. Our land has provided us rich bounty, for God is ever merciful to us in this land of Wales." "My lady." A young man, same golden red hair as Hywel, approached the table. Osrith gave him a smile as he laid a board of meat before her. "My mother believes you would benefit, Pwdingwad," she says, "and will have a servant bring it to you." Beside Hywel, a woman swathed in woolen shawls nodded to her, 2 other young men sitting beside her. Osrith recognized them as having led the men in a tight circle, that might have maneuvered them over the cliff. With Norse camped nearby, it was a good strategy. "Edwin, Dwi," he added. "Dialog Ridich Kai, Edwin," Osrith replied, and the young man burst into hearty laughter. "Sidike Kai," he corrected her, glancing over her form. "My father said our guests spoke Cymraeg differently, but ... anyone would think you have spent your life growling Cymbric in one of those semi-tame lands in the north." "That is because we are from one of those semi-tame lands in the north," Angus replied. "Not like those who speak Brittonic in the lands across the sea, not even of the British island," he scorned. Edwin put a hand to his hip. Angus scraped back the bench and towered over him. "Sit down, please," implored Pyleague, as he got up, addressing them in Cymbric, then turned back to Hywel. "The lady is grateful for your attention, and does, indeed, speak the tongue of our northern cousins." "Indeed," Hywel replied, standing before them all. "Cymric one and all," he told them. "You are most welcome, our friends in the north, speaking the language of my uncle and my cousins. Edwin welcomes you too." Before Angus, Edwin lowered his head, an arrogant grin on his long face, Osrith noticed, which dissolved away when he stood upright again. "My lady," he added, "my mother welcomes you as a sister." And he turned, and sat back by the other two young men who, like their brother and father, had a long broad face and deep-set features. Beside them, a man with darker red hair, almost mahogany in color, sat in silence, watching the people in the hall. "Ignorant turds," Angus grumbled as he sat down, and nodded as a woman brought out a tray of meat and cheese, which he put down on the table in front of them, and, indeed, the blood pudding, black sausage, made of the blood from the autumn kill. More boards appeared on the wide and thick tables, made of hard, old oak, ancient as the land itself. Whole pigs' heads stuffed with jellies, bread, pears and apples, and rich crumbly cheese. "Laura," he asked, of a passing maid. "And cheese." "Boiled water," he added, and Osrith nodded, trying to keep the nausea down. Her eyes were fixed on Pyleague, and the conversation he was having with Hywel. The blade he had been brandishing when they all thought they were going to be attacked he set in front of the King of Deheubarth, its cold steel seeming to steal the light from the room and entrap it in its numerous smith folds. "Eswi, stay beside me," Osrith said, suddenly. Quite why, she did not know, except that there was an awful feeling, like a black cloud surrounding fortress, ready to move in through the walls and drown them all in its wicked waves. "I will, lady," Eswi assured her, and she gave him a grateful look before turning back to the food. The lore was gummy and moved when she put a knife to it, but it spread like butter when she put a skirrick onto a piece of bread, the flavor rich but delicious. The black pudding, as with any time Osrith had ever eaten it, was like a rich, heavy sausage, and she could eat no more than a few bites, putting it back down on her platter as a movement before them caught her eye. Osrith sat up, her eyes drawn to Pyleague, who was still holding the knife. Hywel got to his feet and Pyleague offered it forward, placing the knife so it resting over both of his palms, like an offering. "And now, has our brother Pyleague, at great personal cost, managed to recover the blade long lost to my grandfather, Rodri Mor, taken in the first raids by the Norse to our shores?" "Yes, Squadaf, DWA." There was rigorous applause around the hall, with several of the Cymric getting to their feet and cheering. Hywel placed the blade down on the table in front of him so that it could be seen by everyone. "It is evil," Osrith said, no conviction firmer in her mind. "What did he call it?" Angus leaned across to her. "Ice spite," he replied. "It was stolen in a raid by a Norseman called Canute, before he went across the sea to Irian. It is imbued with the magic of the Scythe, and it is back to where it belongs." This was Lydok, Hywel's brother, who got to his feet, and it was then that Osrith realized that beside his feet ran a chain, over the full length of the floor. She followed it with her eyes and found it led to a circular hole with a fitted lid. The chain ran into it, and, as she looked, Lydok pulled on it, which caused a faint groaning in the far distance. "I know who will be first. Our blade will gut, the bitch," the man declared. "Lydok," reproved Hywel, "the lady may be averse to your show of domination." Lydok stopped pulling on the chain. The groaning stopped, but a curse sounded, and another, words, foul curses, Osrith had heard before. In Danish. If translated, they would approximate to the person hurling the insults questioning the parentage of Lydok. "Shut your hole, you Danish bitch," Lydok roared, then turned away from the chain, and looked back to the table spread, and Osrith felt a chill run over her as she saw Hywel's wife quietly get to her feet and silently leave the hall. Danish bitch, a woman was down there. It will remain here, beside me, Hywel instructed, hovering a hand over the blade as a priest might hold a hand over a suppliant's head. Iasent squadaf, grephied hynafalon pleth he ad, farfrio euglod farfrio euglod, dwa. A loud bang came to her right, and Osrith jumped. It was followed by another, and another, and Osrith recalled the banging and bumping she had witnessed on the night of Samhain, when Domhnall, king of Alba, had grown terrified and begged her to remain with him. Yes, he was old. Yes, he was losing his mind. But it did not explain why her king had been found, naked, face down in the mud, covered in moisture from the morning mist, his sword withdrawn, as if defending his fortress last time. Another bang brought Osrith back to the present, and she jerked her head to the inner hall doors. The noise was getting closer, and she felt herself grip Eswi's arm as they burst open. I claim it. A man stumbled through the doors, holding his stomach, other men, and a woman, Osrith noticed. I claim it, for the evil it has done to me. And he stumbled to the ground, collapsing in agony. Osrith looked to King Hywel, and then back to the man. A warrior, blades at his hips, leather clothing, the telltale signs of male indentations around his face and his wrists. She inhaled sharply, but could not look away. It was her brother. 88,888,888. Take the Lord Utad to the hospital's rooms, King Hywel declared, when the man's identity, through Father Pylig, had been established. Osrith, who had not taken her eyes off her brother, who was being carried carefully between the tables by three men, the woman, her red hair betraying her identity as Eadith. She drew her mind away from Utad's warriors. There was no space in her head for their identity. Sit, Osrith, Eswi encouraged, and she realized that she had stood up. So had everyone else, including the king. My lady, Hywel called over, and Osrith looked at the king. Please, calm yourself. My sons can sit with you, and teach you our dialect of Cymric. He turned to the young men beside him. Oh, Ain, Rodri, he told them, go, sit with the lady. Try to undo the damage your brother has done. And he turned and glowered at Edwin, before adding, I would speak with your men. Beside Osrith, the young men sat, and Eswi, Engus and Phelim got to their feet and walked to the king, who was beckoning them over to where the fire was burning. Edwin did not offend me, Osrith said at once. I speak many languages, Cymric only one. He's a turd, laughed one of the boys. Osrith smiled. Our father says you are a cousin to us? Asked Rodri. So I am given to understand. We are invading our cousins, Ain told her, and got a nudge from Rodri hard in the ribs. Our father said we might need to do some persuading of our uncle, in the north, Anarord, Osrith guessed. As Edward, through his father, coveted a unified Anglo-Saxon land and Constantine claimed the land to the wall, Hywel wanted a unified Wallese, which would ensure Gwynedd, with its Cumbric, mocked here in the south as barbaric. Who is the woman in the pit? Osrith asked, another hunch coming to her. Rodri scoffed. A leader of a warband, the warband who has invaded Abergwan. He kicked at the chain, and Osrith made herself hold her reaction to this and not skewer the jumped-up kingling with tagged Sikhs. It ebbed when Owain said, she killed nearly 100 women, dismembered men *s ... members ... before allowing her warriors to make the ... error on them. She is their prize and she wants them back. It sounded like who Osrith imagined, and her eyes drifted over to the pit, clenching her fit around Buie as she watched Lydok take a piss over it. Then, she glanced over to Hywel. He was taking a brave risk with 3 warriors around him. But he had 3 sons, one of which would inherit Deheubarth if he was murdered, and 2 others would take neighboring kingdoms. Gwent, for example. He was holding Ice Spite, the blade which Pylig had just gifted to the king, which her brother had just claimed from him. What is it with this blade? Ofnadwi, Rodri agreed. Terrible. What does Stjan mean? Osrith shook her head. My apologies, boys, she admitted. That is the Gaelish word, blade, I mean, she said in English, accepting the frowns they gave her. Silel Lofnadwi, Rodri tried, nodding. Terrible blade. And it is terrible, he reiterated. Why does that man want it so much? The man who was dying? He was injured, at the Battle of Tetenholg, Rodri replied. Our father, and our uncle Lidok, all our cousins, went east to fight the war against the Norse. Had it been Saxons and Saxons, my father said they could destroy one another with his blessing. They turned as the door from the dormitory rooms swung open and Osrith recognized Sifik and Osvath come back into the hall, taking up boards and filling them with food. Finan must be with her brother, Osrith thought, as must Edith. He would not have come all this way to find a knife, when he was so ill, for nothing. Tell me, cousin, Osrith asked of the boys. I know little of my heritage, it coming from my mother, who is of Sht, she told them. A little frown, and a whisper from Rodri to Owain, and the younger boy nodded. What is so special about the Silel? It was made when Cymru was made, Rodri told her. The Fae breathed life upon the rocks that brought forth iron, and the dragons, breathed their hot flames upon it, so the metal poured down the mountainsides. He mimicked a flow of liquid in the air with his fingers. The Fae caught the first streams of iron, and forged it, with the help of the dragons, folded it over and over, and the dwarves hammered it and heated it and hammered it again, until it became the hard and firm and indescribably dense. Dwyzedusifan, quipped Owain, and was nudged hard by his brother. And it was left for the Cymric people to find. All wars were won with that blade. But there was a darkness to it, Rodri carried on. Whenever it was used, it cut into the soul of the owner. Wars were perpetrated with it, for the effect was always victory. Osrith felt herself lean down and touch the handle of her own buay. Do you know the story of Brandwin? Rodri asked. Osrith nodded, having been acquainted with it when Owain told them of it on their sailing to Gloucester. Efnisian owned the knife, used it to mutilate Matholj, the king of Ireland's horses. That resulted in years and years of bloody conflict and the near destruction of 3 kingdoms. It is called the Silel Cymru the give and take knife. It gives victory, it takes all goodness. It has to be used twice to undo the evil it does. And a warrior from Dublin stole it from us, Owain told her, eagerly, ruffling his hair. Canute. And he has been using it ever since. Until it was found on the battlefield, and given back to our father tonight, as you saw. That man you saw, he must have been attacked by it. He needs to use it again to cure his injury. So that was it. Ice Spite was the blade's name, and Canute, who had perished at Tetenholg, had stolen it from the Cymric and used it, an enchanted blade, to fight his battles. Of course, you would not know of battles, lady, Rodri continued, folding his arms. We won a great victory at Tetenholg, with Edward, of Wessex. You came when the Saxons needed you, Osrith replied, remembering the day. Had you not, I would not be here to speak to you, this I am sure. The looks on their faces were, of course, predictable. She had been handling this attitude since she was younger than these 2 princes. Yes, I am a woman. Yes, I fought at Tetenholg. And whose side were you on? Asked Owain. Did you wear the red, or the blue? The yellow and green, Osrith told them, watching their looks of horror as she saw them click that she was declaring herself as a mercen that day. Mercia DWA, she added. Thamia Mercia. And then the boys laughed, for the lady's words were a joke, and she laughed too, noticing the boy, Edwin, approaching them. Father says you are to say good night to the lady, he told them. Both looked at Osrith as if it was she who were going to bed, but their elder brother caught them, a shoulder each in his huge hands. You, he clarified. Knows DDA, they chorused, miffed at having been sent to bed by their big brother, and Osrith looked at the prince's face. Lady Osrith, Edwin continued, glancing at the poorly eaten food. My father wishes to speak to you, to clarify whether you say the same as your companions, I would estimate. He lowered his head to her. You are of Northumbria, are you not? Her shock must have shown on her face, But Edwin nodded rather than relished triumph. The tradition of naming of the firstborn prince in Wales as Edwin has happened since King Edwin of Dyria. He fled to Cadwallon's court, and married a daughter of his. One of those began the Dyfed dynasty. He has never been forgotten in Deheubarth. He bent his head to her again. I know my history, and I know a Northumbrian name, Osrith, he emphasized. And Osrith wondered whether he knew he had another direct descendant of Edwin's in his home, come to his father for want of an enchanted blade. Then I am pleased to find you kin in more ways than blood, Osrith told him, in English, and Edwin replied, the thanks of mine. He held out an arm, a wide sweep as Hywel had done when he had welcomed them to his fortress, and Osrith got up slowly, her head spinning a little from having sat at length. And Edwin glanced at her pregnancy bump. This way, he told her, and Osrith followed, but not until she had draped a clean linen cloth onto the table and scooped a generous helping of lard into it, and securing it with bread. She would be needing it later, and deposited surreptitiously behind one of the large wall sconces. But it was not to an anteroom that Edwin took Osrith, but a room well away from the hall, whose wide windows, she noticed as she approached the King of Deheubarth, was all that was keeping them from dropping down the sheer cliffs and into the Atlantic Ocean. Osrith of Strathclyde. Hywel greeted her with a warm smile and a turn of the head. How good it is to meet you, at last. I have long heard of you, of course. I would that I could say the same, Osrith replied. Of course, I knew of the Welsh kingdoms Domnall and Constantine would learn of Britain and had to know the islands and land mass. DDA, you are called. The king threw his head back, and laughed. Both by enemies and my people call me that, he told her, and leaned to her ear. Hywel the good at defeating us, they mean, he chuckled. Now, Osrith of Strathclyde, he continued, kin and cousin, you come to me with a message from the King of Alba, do you not? I do. Osrith nodded, and removed the long-travelled letter from her jerkin, and passed it to him. She could just make out some of the words, in Latin, and wondered whether Constantine, whose head had composed the missive, had used the language of the church to make a point. They were Christian kings, and although Hywel had adopted the Augustine, Roman Church and Alba's church was firmly of Comsil, they were, ultimately, Christian kings ruling Christian lands, and trying to keep Norse and Danes from said lands. It was what she would do, Osrith thought, if she were Constantine. She watched as Hywel read the letter, his eyes fluttering from word to word. When he had got to the end, he nodded, and then looked at Osrith. Now, Osrith, tell me why it is you are here. She glanced at the letter. No, he clarified, why you are here, why no other messenger. Lord King, Osrith said, and inclined her head, so she was bowing to Hywel. I am Cymric, I have always been Cymric, despite having been raised by my father's English family. Constantine tells me we are kin, and as such, feels the message he sends would be given more weight by kin. Hywel seemed to consider this. And what does he say? No, tell me what he told you is therein contained, Hywel cautioned, moving the letter away from Osrith. That you are a king who feels the land to your eastern borders is lost, has been stolen. Constantine believes you may feel akin to him. That the Angles and the Saxons should be driven into the eastern sea. At this, Hywel threw back his head again. To repel the Saxons? Tell him, we have been doing that for years. Hywel was not as flippant as he was trying to sound. Another king with head wisdom. And Osrith could tell that Constantine's proposal intrigued him, for he had not diminished the proposal. And she realized something. We met across the battlefield, at Tenholg, Osrith told him. You pulled me out of the way of a Northman that was about to cleave my head at with his axe. Hywel laughed again. Well, don't let that get around. It would do my reputation no good at all if it gets around that I spared a Saxon. He leaned closer to Osrith. Or two. And he placed a hand over her ever-swelling bump for a moment. I am reconquesting my own way, Murch, he told her. As well as spoils, we were given lands, west of Tenholg, though restored would be a better word, and more, up at the Lady Ethelflaed's town of Stafford. Cymric people live in those lands once again. She smiled, and made to go. He had the letter, and her side of things. Osrith, he said, softly, and she turned back. Osrith of Northumbria. Hywel's words were considered, and he had a faraway look in his eyes. So, Constantine thinks he has found Urian's heir, the last of the Henogled? He looked at her stomach. Not quite last, it would seem. Please, rest, he added. Your men are in the stables. The man Eswi, who would not leave your side. I have granted leave to sleep outside your door, with firm instructions he must not find his priest friend. He knew. Osrith was shocked. She had not spoken to Eswi about the Peleg incident, yet Hywel seemed to know. Yet, she thought, Eswi had said he had trained, or at least partly trained, in Taijui. And you were married? Hywel's question felt too beguiling to leave unanswered. It would be much later that she would remember that the king had used the past tense, but in her defense, Osrith was trying to navigate an entirely different dialect of Cymric. A chill was creeping over her, and she felt sick. For, in her hand, Hywel was holding a second parchment. Yes, her eyes were fixed on it. There was only one way it could have got from Caeligwylid to Dunnottar, Guthard. What deal had Constantine made for this? What had he promised that involved her? Dread pooled in her stomach. Was he the man Constantine meant when he said she was to marry a lord who was his kinsman? Did he count Guthard as kin? Yet, to Osrith's knowledge, Guthard did not own lands near Bibbenberg. Or, at least, Osrith did not think so. Her name was Gwaidhelth, Osrith told him. She married my father, and then my uncle Jaitha, in the Anglish language. I do know her name, Hywel mused. A legend tells of a lost princess, fated to be last Cymric ruler of Sht. He paced from the window, and folded the parchments in on themselves. You are her daughter. You could fight to rule there, should you so wish. Or your child, he added. I think there are enough people fighting for that land. Other claimants, Saxons and the Norse incur more and more often. Flansinner's hold is weakening, Hywel told her. Sigdri Grivason commands Norse in Dublin. He tucked away the parchments. I will consider it. While I do, you will avail yourself of my hospitality? Osrith nodded.